This is Finn Riley, live from London studio. Welcome to the programme. We begin with breaking developments in the Ukraine war. US President Donald Trump has announced he will meet Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska on August 15th, their first face-to-face meeting in 5 years. The high-stakes summit is aimed at ending the war, but Trump has openly suggested a swapping of territory, a proposal Kiev and its European allies firmly reject. The Kremlin calls Alaska a logical venue, while Putin's ICC arrest warrant poses no obstacle since the US is not a member. Crucially, Ukraine will not be represented at the table, fueling questions over whether this meeting could deliver peace or simply sideline Kiev altogether. We're pleased to welcome Donatilla Sagramoso, expert on Russian foreign and security policy at King's College London. Dr. Sagramoso, with President Zelensky excluded from this upcoming Alaska summit, how do you anticipate the talks between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin will proceed, and what could this mean for Ukraine's role in shaping the outcome?
Yes, that's an important point because it's really difficult to see how an agreement that is reached between Putin and Trump can then be sort of forced upon the Ukrainians. I think that's going to be very, very difficult. So I think we will have to wait and see and find out what was agreed potentially in a preliminary discussion, as we know, with Witkoff meeting Putin in Russia. I mean, there have been some reports that some kind of truce could be reached, a sort of ceasefire along the current line of confrontation. There's also reports that potentially this territory could be maybe recognized, at least de facto, as belonging to Russia for some time. There was discussion, as apparently was mentioned by Trump, on exchange of territories, but I find that very unlikely. And of course, there is a question about the lifting of sanctions, which the Americans might sort of go along with, and the Russians are very keen on, and potentially also some energy cooperation in the future. But we really have to see what is, in the details of this agreement and whether it's going to be acceptable to the Ukrainians, which have, of course, made very clear that they're not going to just switch territory as decided by Russia and the United States.
Donald Trump has now explicitly proposed a swap of territories as part of a potential peace deal, something President Zelensky categorically rejects. What does this reveal about Trump's negotiating stance and its potential consequences for Ukraine's territorial integrity?
Well, that's a very important point because, for example, the Russians, they do control most of the Luhansk region or oblast, but the other three, we'll talk about Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Ukrainians still control 25% of territory in each of these regions. And also, if we look at the Donetsk oblast, the area that is under Ukrainian control is heavily fortified and very well defended so far by the Ukrainians. So it's very unlikely to think that the Ukrainians are going to allow the Russians to take over all their defensive lines. So I think it's very difficult to see how these exchanges of territory could occur. I mean, I also don't see the Russians handing in, for example, Zaporizhia or Kherson, because the question of Kherson is also related to water issues in Crimea. So I think that this is, this could just be another attempt to save face. Also for President Trump, whom it seems was very reluctant to press ahead with the ultimatum and the threat of sanctions, which he was mentioning. So it seems that this is also, in a way of making sure that there is some kind of safe facing also on the American side, it seems to me.
Thank you very much, Donatilla Sagramoso, for sharing your insights. We now welcome our next guest, Michael Kimmage, director of the Wilson Center Kennan Institute's former U.S. State Department expert on Russia and Ukraine. President Zelensky has warned that any agreement reached without Ukraine's direct involvement is destined to fail. Given that the Alaska summit will only involve Trump and Putin, what realistically should we expect from this meeting?
Well, I think it's hard to expect a fundamental breakthrough because not only is Ukraine not at the table, but Europe writ large is not at the table as well. And Europe and Ukraine are fundamental elements of the war, obviously, but they will be fundamental to a true diplomatic settlement to the war. So it's possible that Presidents Trump and Putin could emerge with a piece of paper from this meeting. It's possible that they could speak about some kind of breakthrough or concessions, but the real work, if that would be the case, would then begin after the summit, when President Trump would have to persuade a host of European countries and Ukraine to go along with him. So it feels like some of the statements coming from the White House at the moment are quite far ahead of the reality of the situation, which neither Putin nor Trump can resolve single-handedly.
Donald Trump has indicated that territorial swaps could be on the table in negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. From your perspective, how should we interpret this, and what might it mean in practical terms for the future of the conflict?
I think it's a bizarre statement. It's not as if Ukraine occupies at the moment any Russian territory to swap for territory that Russia might give to Ukraine in Ukraine. And I just don't think, as Zelensky has stated emphatically, that Ukraine can accept any formal handing over of territory to Russia. I think as well that Germany and the countries of Europe would find that completely unacceptable. So it is possible that there could be some kind of ceasefire announced. That to me seems conceivable coming from the summit. I can't imagine any territorial arrangement, especially under the rubric of the word swapping, that Ukraine would agree to. So it's a very curious statement indeed from the White House.
The Alaska summit is shaping up to be a defining moment in the war. A high-profile gamble with Ukraine's fate discussed in its absence. Whether it produces a breakthrough or a diplomatic dead end will become clear in just days. Stay tuned for more updates on this story. Keep watching Ocean News.